Hello, literature lovers. Today, as you can see, I'm discussing postcolonial theory. This portion is also quite relevant, and postcolonialism is an academic discipline that comprises methods of intellectual discourse that present analysis of and responses to the cultural legacies of colonialism and imperialism. It's also part of Commonwealth literature. It started in 1960s at former colonies that produce literatures of their own in English, and English literature mutating into literatures in English concentrated on meaning, that is, the interpretation, part of liberal humanism. Post-colonial literature, that's the Commonwealth literature, was not desired anymore when the former British colonies found that writers of colonizers do not form a part of this body of literature. Hence, a new term is used and suggested as the post-colonial literature, suggests the decentering of colonial literature. The post-colonialism focuses on the cultural displacement and its consequences for personal and communal identities, how the displaced have defended themselves, deploys a non-Eurocentric present perspective, the questions that values that supported imperialism. Some of the originating texts related to his Wretched of the Earth, that's 1916, published by Frantz Fanon. Really one of my favorites. If you ask, its translated version is available. You can have it. Orientalism, 1978, by Edward Said. Writer is great, and his perspective is really very fruitful. The Empire Strikes Back, 1989, Ashcroft, Griffith, and Tiffin. So this book is also quite interesting, and it will really intrigue you. It's my personal recommendations, depending upon your own thoughts, that's different. Now, characteristics of post-colonial theory. I'm talking about an awareness of representation of the non-European as exotic or immoral, that depending on others. Linguistic difference, that's a different point of view. And emphasis on identity as double or hybrid or unstable. And from my point of view, these terms are just terms, but when you go in deep, they are really, really somewhat very different from what we feel actually, since I am also part of this post-colonial era. So, on the term, this cross-cultural interactions. So, there is obviously cross-culture, talking about post-colonial theory. Spatial and distinctive regional characteristics. So, yeah, there are. And so we can divide them in three phases: the adopt phase, the adapt phase, and then the adapt phase. So, how we do it depending upon our. The discourse of post colonialism is not about the former colonizer, but about the colonized others. For the first time, the non West is placed at the center of the dominant discourse of the Western Academy. I'm talking about the time and locale. Thus, the question arises: what exactly does the post-colonial begin? And when the third world intellectuals have arrived in first world academy, then how the things goes. Talking about the famous book, The Empire Writes Back, the literature of, this is a quote from this book, the literature of African countries, Australia, Bangladesh, Canada, Caribbean countries, India, Malaysia, Malta, New Zealand, Pakistan, Singapore, South Pacific Island countries, Sri Lanka, and all post-colonial literatures. The literature of USA should also be placed in this category, perhaps because of its current position of power and neo-colonization role it has played. is post-colonial literature has been generally recognized. Talking about the Edward Said's thought related to it, that's also quite important when we talk about the era, since I have discussed in my earlier lectures also. So his Orientalism book is somewhat different from what others all come in that category, and it's more theoretical and won't find any contradiction related to the postcolonial theory. And although his term "let's hegemony" is quite popularized and since adopted by Antonio Gramsci, so that's his terminology led to cultural studies and some other perspectives related to it. And now we can clearly see and differentiate West and the Orient. Now, Homi Baba, that also I have discussed earlier, and his interpretation, and it's one of my privilege that I personally met him, and his personal reference in my life is also there. So I only got few minutes with him, and I met him in a literature festival. So his abilities, and since we all know his qualification, he belongs to Oxford. That's his qualification. So that I'll really we can bifurcate how intellectual qualities led him to that university first was best university. So we can understand him, and according to his perspective, the things are quite different. And another perspective that can be discussed is the racial one, and we all know about it how they bifurcated and divided India and different post-colonial countries, and how they differentiated, and inferiority complex is also part of that period. And since they see us in some inferior context, and there are differences obviously in different perspectives, and it's called that's the reason why later on the hybridity concept came into existence. And and it's also mixing of the many other concepts like Marxism and feminism. So talking about feminism, we are aware of our famous philosopher Gayatri. So she belonged to West Bengal, India, and she is really considered the feminist agenda of postcolonial theory. And her term was quite famous, the subterranean one. So all of them are very important, and that's now really we can call the hybrid version of the things. And since it controls the mixing of it, I hope you would have really got the overview of it and got the better understanding. Thanks for being part of it. Thank you.